Fox Kids on Saturday mornings. Rochester definitely got a lot of ratings from shows like Goosebumps and Power Rangers back in the day. Those were their prime killers for the ratings, and definitely I think R.L. Stine has always had this label put on him and always had it reiterated how he was the creative mind behind Goosebumps. Nobody ever remembers the Haunting Hour or any novel series he put out after Goosebumps and its success. It's unbelievable, unparalleled height of success and all of its hype. A lot of people still reiterated to R.L. Stine, you're the creative genius behind Goosebumps, and he prides himself on that. He recently just got the executive role position of Goosebumps, and he was a great influence on that movie because obviously Hollywood had listened to us all who were saying, you can't have a Goosebumps movie without the authentic characters, because if you don't have the authentic characters like Slappy the Living Dummy or the Horrorland characters, it's pretty much no point of you ever even putting this movie out. It's either to go big or to go home with this movie, and that's what I was reiterating all the time in interviews on blogtalkradio.com about the Goosebumps movie, because everybody knew, obviously, I was a huge Goosebumps fan, just as you've known for years. I was a fan of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, their original series, which premiered after being Go Rangers for a number of years in Japan as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in 1993 in the spring of that year. Everybody knew I was a huge Goosebumps fan, just as all of you were Goosebumps fans. Everybody knew how many Goosebumps books I have actually read or how many Goosebumps TV shows I've seen from back in the 90s. And I said, you can't have a Goosebumps movie without these authentic characters that people remember from the series. How are you going to have a Goosebumps movie? Let me put it in perspective for you. How were you going to have a Goosebumps movie or ever think about putting out a Goosebumps movie with an entirely different script to a new generation? That would have served its purpose to the new generation, but think about how upset the older generation of fans of Goosebumps who remember the series back when it was number one, back in 94, 95, without these characters. People would have came away from this movie really upset. People of the new generation probably would have been excited to read about the new script and see the new script on the big screen, but not so much for the older generation of fans who purchased all the new Goosebumps books around the time they came out from Scholastic and seen the series back in the 90s. People would have wanted to see the Dummy. People would have wanted to see the Attack of the Mutant reiterated. People would have wanted to see the Horrorland characters. And I kept saying, it's either you go big or you go home with this movie. And obviously Hollywood listened to all of us as a group of fans of Goosebumps, a legion of fans, and gave us what we wanted. And that's why this movie's been receiving great reviews ever since. When it drops on DVD and Blu-ray, I'm expecting it to sell millions of copies, maybe not instantly, just as I didn't expect it to go to the top instantly, but it will sell millions of copies, and that's to be expected. And I'm looking forward to finding out what the reports are on the sales of DVDs and Blu-rays and digital downloads of this one, because it's definitely going to be a number one hit. I would have loved to have seen it come out around the holiday season, because it would have been a tremendous stocking stuffer for fans of the Goosebumps novels and or the award-winning series back in the 90s. And the thing is now, are we going to see a sequel of Goosebumps? That's being debated. I don't think we're going to see a sequel of Goosebumps. This is definitely in the category of a one-hit wonder, because you can only put something out like this once, because it's only expected to be a one-hit wonder, because how can you follow up with the Goosebumps? It's not like we're going to see Goosebumps 2 or Goosebumps 3 being dropped within the next 3 to 4 year period. Possibly a 5-year project is what's probably expected from Goosebumps, but I don't see that. Jack Black did a great job once and only once as R.L. Stine. You can only put something out so much before that trend dies out, and I think it very quickly would die out if we saw Jack Black brought back as R.L. Stine, more than what we probably would want to see him brought back. And I don't think that Goosebumps needs a second or third installment at this point, because it's not like we had unanswered questions of what's next for the characters of Goosebumps or what's next for these authentic characters we've read about for years in the books, who sometimes gave us nightmares, or we saw in the original TV series. There aren't any unanswered questions from how this movie definitely, played out, and I don't think these movies need to be put out over and over again. Once and only once is enough for something like Goosebumps. It definitely had a great trailer, and it had a great promotional campaign, and I think, that's where we go back to, hearing about all the great reviews this movie got. Did it disappoint me, or did it leave me pleased? I think it pleased me more than what I had expected it to. Because the characters were there, the great script was there. We also had a chance to see it introduced to an entirely different global audience who aren't familiar with what Goosebumps meant to all of our lives. I mean, who out there didn't read a Goosebumps? Who didn't own 4 or 5 Goosebumps books if you didn't even own the entire series? You had at least one Goosebumps book that you read when you were a kid. And I think everybody, males, females, people of different age demographics, all read a Goosebumps book. You either read a Goosebumps book yourself or you read it with a member of your family, probably a young fan of Goosebumps as a mother or a father or a grandmother or a grandfather. The thing is, you read these books and you all experienced Goosebumps in some way or another. And I think that's why this movie, kept on getting as many great reviews as what it did. People didn't immediately jump to criticism. There were the critics of Hollywood movies and hits that we had seen for years that immediately jumped to criticizing something like Goosebumps because they said, oh, it's too late to put out a Goosebumps movie. There's no way this one's going to get over. But I mean, we have diehard fans of things like Goosebumps, so why couldn't it get over? It obviously proved out to be an incorrect assumption by the critics who instantly jumped to criticism of things like Goosebumps because this movie obviously got over in an entirely different generation, in a generation that you wouldn't believe that this movie would have been able to exist. And I think that if we did see a Goosebumps 2 or a Goosebumps 3, it obviously would get over just as effectively because of how much so many people couldn't wait to see this movie, how many people went out and actually spent money on this movie. Just the number of people who went out and flocked to the theater and spent money on a ticket for Goosebumps shows just how many diehard fans we have about this and who haven't forgotten about Goosebumps. You can put out as many episodes of The Haunting Hour or any novel that you want from R.L. Stine, and nothing's going to top the success of Goosebumps and the response that it received. Ever since the first Goosebumps book came out, we got more and more Goosebumps books as part of the series. I had a specific shelf, devoted to Goosebumps books when I was a kid, and on that shelf I had literally over 100 Goosebumps books, and I read virtually every single one of them. The thing is, the other day I was down to Walmart and I saw the Twilight books, and I picked up the Twilight book and I saw the overwhelming flow of content in the book. Some books ranged anywhere from 8 to 1,000 pages in the book. And, the book had so much content, and then you could get a Goosebumps book from about 20 years ago, and so little, content in the book, less than 100 pages. Some of the Goosebumps books were in comparison to 1,000 pages of a Twilight novel, and so many different parts of Twilight. You could have one Goosebumps book, just one book of a series, not even a book of a series, with less than 100 pages, and get more excitement and more enjoyment in reading a Goosebumps book than you could of a 1,000-page of Twilight. That's just amazing. That just should put in a perspective for you just how much of an impact, a significant impact, if anything, Goosebumps has had in our lives. More people will read an original Goosebumps book, not even a series, than 1,000 pages of Twilight. And I think that, that's going to be something that will be discussed and often debated for so many years. What do you prefer more, Twilight or Goosebumps? Obviously, Twilight is one of the top trends in the world, and if a Twilight movie came out tomorrow from the original producers of the original Twilight from 2008 to 2013, more people would flock to the theater to see Twilight than they probably would a Goosebumps movie because that's the new trend. But if Goosebumps were to be able to come back as a trend and had more merchandise and more books, I think they would obviously take over as one of the top trends for kids. And that's why I say, about, remaking series like Goosebumps and even Are You Afraid of the Dark or the Power Rangers in their original form. Reintroduce them in their original forms to these new generation of fans and watch the ratings of different TV networks and people who produce these go through the roof. The conversation would be at an all-time high. If you wrote new episodes of Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark, the ratings would definitely skyrocket and the morale of companies like Nickelodeon and Scholastic would go through the roof. They definitely have a better reputation than what they do now, and the purpose of having the splat would be completely defeated because you'd have things to be able to fall back on when you're talking about an award-winning corporation like Nickelodeon or Scholastic. The thing is, the reason why these companies can't compete directly with Disney is because, they don't have anything to fall back on, but you bring back Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark, then you have something to keep going back to and falling back on, which you don't have right now, and it's because you don't have enough confidence to bring Goosebumps back. The next step for something like Goosebumps would obviously be to bring it back as a series. That would be awesome to see, rather than just one movie and go about 10 years before we possibly see another one. Bring it back as a TV series for Nickelodeon. Bring it back as a TV series for any network, even YTV, with new episodes. You don't even have to base it on the book. You can bring back some of the characters from the books if you want to, probably base it off the book if you want to, and just write new episodes of Goosebumps. That would be obviously the next step for this one to take, and I think there would be a lot of great reviews. There would be high ratings for companies like YTV and Teletoon, and I think it would definitely get over this new generation. There's no reason why Goosebumps can't coexist with an award-winning show of the new generation, or can't be produced alongside an award-winning show of the new generation with new writers and new scripts and new episodes based off the books and the characters from the books that we remember back in the 90s. That would be something to see, and I would love to see that. If you can turn The Notebook into a TV series. You can do the same thing with Goosebumps, and it can be reiterated to a new generation over and over again as many times as what you want. Obviously, what that comes from is the fact there's no confidence in putting it out as a series with new episodes based off the characters from the original books back in the 90s. Because again, maybe people are right to some aspects of how they're saying, it's too late to be bringing back Goosebumps in this generation who don't understand anything about it. But with that being said, there are so many people out there who haven't forgotten about Goosebumps and the significant impact it has always had on our lives and always will. There are more people that don't know about Goosebumps, yes, but there are even more people who have not forgotten about the significant impact that Goosebumps have had on all of our lives, and I think that's why you can get away with doing something extraordinarily special with Goosebumps. Am I right or am I wrong with having said that? I think I can get away with saying that. That's why I've been giving this movie and the decision to bring it back in 2015 such raving reviews, because I am someone who agrees with the fact that Goosebumps can coexist with something alongside an award-winning TV series of today. You take an award-winning TV series of today and you put it alongside an award-winning TV series of the past 20 years, and you're creating magic. You're giving us a reason to watch Saturday morning cartoons again. You're probably going to be even bringing back Saturday morning cartoons and the idea of Spider-Man and the Power Rangers and Goosebumps existing like they did back in the 90s over 20 years ago as part of Fox Kids Rochester. That would be awesome. But we don't have a reason to right now. We don't have a reason to be excited. And I think Goosebumps was the first reason we've had to be excited in years.